Hi again, everybody. Steve Scott here for another rousing edition of our Kaizen Online Learning Program. Thank you for joining me for this edition. Today, let's talk about skill and technique, actually, technique and skill. What is the difference? Is there a difference? And if you've read any of my books, you know I talk about this a lot. Um, I will say for this video session here today, I will be using as a reference my book, Sambo Encyclopedia. However, I also have written about this same subject in Winning on the Mat and Coaching on the Mat, and just different, said basically the same thing in different ways. But I will say it again here today in this video in case you have not read those books or you might want a little bit more of my personal explanation of it, just hearing me say it, than what you might read in what I've on the printed page in my books. So in any event, I am using my book and I will be looking down from time to time for reference on what I want to say exactly about skill and technique because I want to be very precise in this. First of all, when someone says, he's got good technique. Boy, does he have good technique. Okay. They're really making reference to that person's skill in doing that technique. So he's got good skill. He makes that thing really work. That thing, that's fabulous. And so it's in the effective application of a technique. It's what skill is. So when someone says he has good technique, yeah, he probably does have good technique, but he also knows how to apply that technique to make it work for him. And what is a technique? Okay, I'll just read it right out of my book, page 30 of Sambo Encyclopedia. A technique is a specific, unique, and identifiable movement. Skill is the actual application of that movement. So that's what technique is, and that's what skill is. Skill is an actual, or a technique is the very specific. Let's take the throw Tai Otoshi body drop. Okay, it's where if you don't know it, if that's not your sport or you have different nomenclature, that's the throw where I throw my opponent when I split my legs wide or kind of wide, and he goes over one of those legs. I make him do that. It is a very specific, unique thing. It is that technique. So that is what Tai Otoshi looks like. Now, how I make that happen is totally up to me, and how I control my opponent and how I control the circumstances, how I break his balance and fit in, all this stuff. So that's the skill application of it, is the actual application of how to make that technique work. Okay, so that's what skill is as opposed to technique. Okay, um, I'm very pragmatic. I'm very believe in functional approach to learning and training of technical skills. Um, I, my firm belief is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And as one of my athletes, a very quotable guy, Sean Watson, once said, "It's only pretty if it works." Okay, so aesthetics have a secondary role to the actual functional application and success of the event of the movement. Okay, and that's very important. Um, and because of this, for a good skill, a good technical skill to actually work when you need it to work in a fight, in a match, whatever it may be, self-defense situation, you have to train as realistically as possible. Um, that doesn't mean all out combat and randori and fighting and fighting and fighting. It does mean good functional drill training, good functional focused structured randori. It does mean um, train it so that that move works, that skill, that technique, I should say, works the best for you personally. When I was fortunate enough to train with Morris Allen, the world Sambo champion, and a number of years ago, and he's a world-class judo man as well, and wrestler. Um, he told me, he said, we were doing judo in that particular case. He said, make your judo work for you. And then we were doing sambo. He says, well, conversely, make the technique work for you. Fit that technique, mold it to fit your body. That's what skill is. Okay. I'm a big, tall guy. I can't do the same. My seoinage, well, my shoulder throw will look different to a great degree than someone. I'm almost 6'4", than someone who's 5'4". Okay. A good example. My wife is 5'3", and when she was competing, she was a good Seoinage fighter, and she threw a lot of people with Seoinage. Well, when I was a young man and competing, I threw a lot of people with Seoinage too, but I did it totally different. But it was still Seoinage. But we made it work. Each person makes it work for himself or herself. That's the point of what I'm saying here. So um, I'm trying to make a synopsis, try to focus this down. So when you read this stuff in my books, you can kind of get a sense of what I'm saying by use this video and kind of use this as reference as well. So I hopefully not spend a lot of time yapping about this subject because I hope you read this. I think I do better service by writing than actually talking about it here. But I did want to flesh it out a little bit so you hear some of my own explanations about this. But let's look at skill because skill has always been fascinating to me in a sense, and what prompted me to really, after training with Morris Allen, actually, he was the guy that really was that impetus. But what prompted me to really get interested in this was reading more and more by Jeff Gleason, and I consider Jeff Gleason one of the foremost coaches, certainly, and technical thinkers in judo ever. And that would also apply to anything in any grappling sport because Jeff Gleason has done a lot of work. So if you can get any of his books that are still in print, I would highly recommend it, starting with Judo for the West. Great book. That's the one that got me started many, many years ago. And I would recommend it. Still timely, what he says. But beyond that, and also reading other things from other people, um, and also doing my own research. These are some things I came up with. So again, I got them here in front of me. I'm just going to jot them off as I think of it here and do it. So let's look what skill is. So, but first we've established what technique is. Technique is a specific way of doing. It's a specific identifiable movement. Okay, a Jujigatami, a crossbody arm lock. There's no mistake. That's what it is. That's definitely what it is. Taiotoshi, the body drop, the split throw some people call it, where you split both legs. That is identifiable. I mean, that's definitely what it is. Okay, so there are things that's what technique is. Okay, but skill is how you do it. Okay, we got that. All right. Let's look at some other definitions of skill, and I've written these down over the years and jotted. And I thought, well, let's read them, and maybe they'll make some sense to you. Um, Skill isn't dependent on a fixed technique, movement, or pattern. Again, skill is how you make it. Okay, you've got to make it work for you. It's only skillful if it's effective. Okay, um, skill is really a means to an end. Okay, my purpose, say in a judo match, at least I want to throw the guy in a sambo match, judo match, whatever it may be. I want to throw him to the ground with force and control and defeat him. Well, that technique and a skillful application of the technique is a means to an end. Okay, that makes sense. But again, I've got to make sure that rather than just emphasize the technique, I've got to emphasize the skillful application of that technique. So the technique is the movement, the taiotoshi. How I achieve that is up to me, like I said before. Okay. Skill is the actual application of technique. I saw it wrote down here. Okay. A technique is, like I said, it's unique, but a skill can be done in such a way that will alter the look of the technique too. So let's say a taiotoshi. It's a very obvious one to use, and I'm using it here quite often in this video. I had an athlete train with me. He was a very good heavyweight, and his name was Tom Alejos, and he was a national level judo player, very good one too. And he was about 5'10" and weighed about 290, and solid man. He had big, thick legs, big, thick arms, and good technique, very good technique. His judo was quite skillful, and he had a taiotoshi that was very effective for him, but he had a very narrow base with the legs, very narrow base, and his legs were very close together. His feet were very close together when he actually came in and threw someone with his taiotoshi. Conversely, I had another very good athlete, won a lot of matches, was a numerous junior national champion in judo, international medalist, Bill West, both collegiate, high school. I mean, very, very good athlete. Bill West, very good taiotoshi, very good Jujigatami man as well. But Bill had a dynamite taiotoshi, and he was a 143 pounder. That's in the weight class he fought in those days, and for a while 132 as well. And he was he had a very wide split in his Taiotoshi. He threw a lot of guys with Taiotoshi, probably just as many as Tom did with his Taiotoshi. But if you looked at them, they were very different. But they were still the basic idea. Legs were split wider apart than the hips, and they got under them and trapped the bump through them. But it was both Taiotoshi, but two totally different approaches to Taiotoshi, depending on the men doing it. So that's what skill is. It's skill is you make that work for you, and so it may look different to some people than not. And here we get also another thing in judo, where we have a lot of, not a lot, but some throws have different names, but they kind of look alike. Okay, so you do a cross body movement. I grip my opponent. I'm doing a sideways or lateral approach to doing osotogari, major outer reap. Okay, where I'm basically throwing off to the side, as opposed to throwing them directly back or maybe taking a back step or something else. It's a sideways movement. In many cases, someone may say, well, that was a great Harai Goshi, sweeping hip throw, because it will look very much like a Harai Goshi. But my intent was to do osotogari. Or I may actually put my foot down in the action of doing it and throw him with what would look like a Taiotoshi. So the movement pattern, I have an idea in mind, a technique in mind, but it depends on how I move and how my opponent moves and how well I control his movement and my own movement, whether that's going to come off exactly as the osotogari I intended. It may come off slightly different, it may not. Or someone, by their own level of knowledge or their own interpretation, may say, gosh, what a terrific Harai Goshi that was. Well, like one of my athletes many years ago said, Donnie Bunch said, no matter what you call it, just call it a pawn. Okay, and that was a great way to look at it. So if you want to call it osotogari, osotogaki, Harai Goshi, oguruma, whatever you want to call it, as long as it's a good pattern, a good technique, and works for you, okay, it works. Okay, my intention may have been to throw with osotogari, but that's what ended up happening. Okay, so that's how it happened. Okay. Something skillful, and again, I'm going from my notes here, so bear with me. Skillful is the most efficient and effective application of a technique relative to the circumstances. So I think I just may have covered that in a long roundabout way, but relative to the circumstances at hand. Okay. Now I want to control as many of those circumstances as possible. And again, if you go back to some of my other videos, you may have seen control the position, get the submission. Well, remember, a throwing technique is also a submission technique, because if I throw him hard enough, I will win the fight. Okay, you may knock him cold, you may end the fight right there, and that's the idea of a good, skillful throw. But again, relative to the circumstances. Okay, so I want to control as many of those circumstances as possible, and if I do, and everything goes right after lots of practice and good hard effort on my part, I'll pull it off and make it work. So those are just some ideas here. Let me go through some other notes here, just again off the top of the head. As I mentioned before, for an improvement in skill to take place, it must be learned and practiced in the way it is to be performed. Okay. In other words, practice the way you intend to do it. Right. Neil Adams told me a long time ago, practice doesn't make perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. Okay. And he may have picked up that from somebody else, I don't know, but he was the first guy I heard to say it. And it sure does make a lot of sense to me. Okay. So again, perfection may be impossible, but we sure want to achieve it if we can. We really strive for it, and especially in skill learning. So, and something you may have gleaned over what I just said here in a bit. You not only want to practice it the way you will intend to use it, but you want to learn it the way you intend to use it. So that takes, as a coach, and you coaches, this is my take on this. When you teach something, you're going to teach a fundamental skill, a fundamental way of doing a movement. That Tayotoshi again, we'll use that as an example. There is a basic way of doing it, the way of breaking the balance, fitting the body in, developing the technique, execution of the technique, the attack, and the follow through. There is a structured way of doing Tayotoshi, what looks, and we all identify as Tayotoshi. And when you're teaching novices or beginners, new people, you want to make sure all those elements are there and you teach the technique fundamentally correctly. Sound fundamentals are essential. And remember, elite level, world class performance in any sport, that's nothing more than simply fundamentals done to their full potential. And for it to be done to its full potential, that fundamental skill, that fundamental technique has to be done the most efficient way to fit that person's body under the circumstances, relative to the circumstances. Hope that makes sense. Because I've got to make, as Morris Allen said, I've got to make the technique work for me. Okay. I can't mold my body to fit to a preconceived notion of what it has to look like. Okay. I have to make that technique work for me. So Tom Alejos, like I said before, short, stocky man, very powerful man. He had a narrower stance on his Tayotoshi that worked well for him. He had a high ratio of success with that throw, as opposed to another body weight, 143 pounder, Bill West. He had a wider stance. He made it work for him. Okay, it goes back to. But when I was teaching those guys those skills, and I was their coach, and when I was teaching them their skills, I taught them the basics of Tayotoshi, but I also saw, as a young coach working with those guys, how each of them naturally tended to do this or do that. Okay, and that's where coaching just isn't a science, it's also an art, because we're doing it with people, with real human beings. So that's where the art comes into it. That's where we have to make it work for our students. So as a coach, when I see this, I want to make sure I take the time. So when I see a Tom Alejos and he likes to have a narrower stance than maybe I was showing it in the basic way of teaching it, that he narrows it up, and he's still doing it very well with high ratio of success and very skillful, I'm not going to say, no, you can't do that, you're doing it wrong. I'm going to make sure I encourage that behavior that will produce good, successful results. So mold it, and it's very difficult to do as a coach. You can't just cookie cutter, approach your coaching. You have to mold that technique to fit your student, to your athlete, pretty much from the start. Now, don't get me wrong, you have to teach the fundamentals. The basics have to be done correctly. You have to do them right. But at the same time, as a coach, that's where coaching is a real serious task. It's a real serious business. I have to take everything I do seriously and study my craft, my art, my science, to make sure that I'm showing that student that move's going to work best for him. Okay. And again, it may work for him well now, and as he develops, as he grows, as his body changes, teaching a child, he grows into an adult, or something changes in some way, he may alter that technique over a course of time to make it work even better for him. Or he may discard that technique because after a while, it's no longer useful for him for whatever reason. So don't get married to just a one way of doing the technique. That's what skill's about. Skill is a moving, kind of I don't want to say living thing. It's kind of a silly way to say it, but it's a dynamic thing. Skill is, because a good example, when I was a young boy learning Seoinage, I learned the basics of Seoinage from my sensei Jerry Sweat. Okay, he was a good Kodokan black belt. I learned a good standard Seoinage. Okay, as I grew older, especially after training with Morris Allen, he helped train me to fit that, mold that to my body better. So things change. When I was a young man, I was a kid under Jerry, that Seoinage was really, really effective for me at the time. And as I got older and my body changed, I got bigger, stronger, whatever it may be, I changed it. I made it work for me. And I think all of you can relate to the same thing. Okay, so that skill may adapt over a period of time, and not everybody will pick up a technique and use it immediately. So let's say you might have a person you're trying to teach them. Let's say Tayotoshi again. Okay, we'll use that as an example. Been using it all along, and they just don't get it. It's not their thing. They can do it well enough. They can do it in practice. They have trouble if they struggle with it in randori or under a more stressful situation. They can do some drills with it, but it's not on a high level of success for them. It's just not their thing. They don't do it. Not every throw, not everybody likes every throw or every technique. Okay, but let's say several years go by, that person continues to practice for one reason or another. That person begins to take a shine to Tayotoshi. Okay, and maybe a little bit different than the way you might have showed it to them. They learned it at first, or it could be the exact same way. But it may take a set period of time before that person kind of grows into that technique, or that technique grows onto that person. So be patient as a coach. Not everybody's going to get everything you teach them, and you're going to have to do a lot of repeating. And this skill development takes time. Okay, I was just watching Kenny Brink work with his kids at Welcome Mat, because Kenny's taken over our doing a great job with our judo program and our judo team at the community center where I used to coach. And he was doing some very basic skills, and I've seen him do this over a period of time. It's almost like he's coaching by osmosis, okay? And it's not, because he's introducing the move, and as time goes along, through drills, through constant practice, through constant repetition, but he makes it interesting, he'll add a different element to that move. Or he'll go up to a different set of kids and say, try this, try that, which may be totally different from the other set of kids he worked with. So developing good skill takes some time. It doesn't happen quickly. You have to, like I said, you have to it has to grow on you in a way, or you have to grow on it. It's kind of like developing a relationship with another human being. After a while, we kind of grow on each other, or we don't. We may find, hey, this just isn't working for me. Same with the technique. It just may not work for you. Okay, there's some things that, you have preference for, some things you don't. And certainly technique and skill, the same thing. Just some more notes here. Here's, again, going back to skill. Skill can be defined as achieving a previously specified goal. Okay, I think we might have said that in another way earlier, but that's just a way of looking at it. I also want to mention very quickly before I wrap this up, don't be a poser. Okay, don't be, we're not posing for a still photo shot or something. Don't try to mold your body to make it look like some kind of preconceived motion. Just because you saw some famous champion do a move a very specific way doesn't mean you should, one, do it that way, or doesn't mean can do it that way. Okay, odds are if that great champion is doing that fabulous move that you saw on YouTube, what you didn't see were those thousands of hours of practice that man or woman put into that, to making it look like that so he could achieve it at that level of competition. Okay, so don't think he holds his hand a specific way that you have to. Okay, you've got to take that technique, make it work for you. Okay, because that's certainly what that champion did. He or she worked a lot, and his coach probably helped him a lot of time and effort put into how I should hold my hands to make it most effective for me. So don't pose, don't try to copy someone else outright. Okay, because you saw something in a book, make it this way of doing this seoi-nage or this tayotoshi or whatever thrower technique it may be, ground technique. That doesn't mean you have to do exactly that way. Yes, you want fundamentally the correct technique of doing it, you bet. But you don't want to copy someone else's, because really, we're all different. All our bodies are different. Our mindsets are different. Our temperaments are different. Everything, we're unique, each of us. So we have to make that technique fit us. Again, going back to what Morris Allen told me, make the technique work for you. Make that technique fit you. And that's the idea of skill as opposed to just what a technique is. So, on posing, one more thing. Avoid artificial posturing. I said, I made a note here. part of that posing, part of that artificial posturing, um, make it natural. Make it effective. If it's effective, it will be natural. Okay, so train for the effect, train for the results. Don't trade for how it looks. Aesthetics are certainly secondary to effectiveness. The function of a technique has greater priority than what it looks like. Okay, again, going back to what Sean Watson said, it's only pretty if it works. Okay, so that's a way of looking at what skill is. Um, so I think that's pretty much, rounded it out. I would say definitely go to my books, and I'm not trying to peddle books. I'm just telling you these are good reference points for you. Sambo Encyclopedia, Winning on the Mat, Coaching on the Mat. I repeat it in a number of my different books. I think John Saylor and I pointed it out quite a bit in our book Vital Jiu-Jitsu. But I would also look up under other authors, such as especially Jeff Gleason and what he writes about this subject as well. I'm heavily influenced by him, and I will very proudly and adamantly say that he was a great influence on me as a coach, certainly, and how I train my athletes, and the theories and concepts I'm trying to portray here on these video series for online coaching. So that being said, that's skill and technique. Remember, function it dictates what it should look like. Okay, it's only, like I said, only pretty if it works. So there we have it. A 26-minute and some odd second detour into the world of skill and technique. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got something out of it, and I hope I didn't blab too long. So I will see you on another edition of this, if not sooner. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.